Hello everyone, 大家好, and welcome back to AB Chinese. I'm so glad you could join me today. In this video, we are going to talk about classifiers or measure words. Basically, these are what allows you to talk about a quantity of something in Chinese. And I also want to thank Fal Stefanarov, sorry if I butcher your name, for requesting this topic. So that's what we will discuss today. We'll first just briefly go over what a classifier is. I'll go over the basic structure for how to use them. Then we'll discuss two contingencies, and finally I'll show you how to best search for them in a dictionary. So let's get started. 我们开始吧. A measure word is basically a word that we attach to a number to indicate that we are measuring something, hence the term measure words. In Chinese, we use classifiers or measure words to modify our numbers so that we know that we're talking about a quantity and not a sequence. And actually, we have something like these in English too when we talk about a cup of water or a flock of birds. But of course, in English, if you're just talking about two dogs, you would just say two dogs. In Chinese, though, the difference is that we use measure words for everything. So if you want to talk about any quantity of objects in Chinese, you generally need these three components. The first one is obviously just your number, and then that's followed by a classifier. So what this does is it indicates that your number is a quantity and not a sequential number. And then finally, the last component is just your noun, the objects that you're talking about. So in our example, we have 三个苹果, and that just means 3 apples. Now I'm introducing you to this classifier. It's pronounced 个. First, if you don't know this one already, because this one is the universal classifier. So in Chinese, we have a lot of classifiers, and each noun or object that we have in the world has a classifier that's assigned to it. And that's like the classifier we always use with it. But 个 is the general classifier that you would use. A, if you're not sure which classifier is appropriate, or B, if it's an object that you're not familiar with. So this one is very good to use because starting out, if you just use this classifier, everyone will understand you. However, as you start to progress and you get better at Chinese, you'll definitely want to learn at least some of the other classifiers that are very commonly used, because then you'll sound more well-spoken and more fluent in Chinese. Another thing I want to point out is that sometimes you'll have 2 or even more classifiers that are accepted for a certain object or noun. So in our example, apples has another classifier, and it's 颗. So you can say 三颗苹果. And that would mean more or less the same thing, but usually when you have a choice, there's certain nuances between the classifiers to indicate something about the object's shape or size. Think glass of water versus a cup of water. And when one of the choices is 个, or whenever you choose to use 个 over another, maybe more specific classifier, you generally will sound more conversational and more casual. So that's something to keep in mind. The last thing I want to mention before we move on is that you can drop the noun if it's obvious what you're talking about. So if a merchant is selling you apples and he was asking you how many you wanted, you would just reply with 三个, and that would just mean 3. And of course, the classifier would indicate that you're talking about a quantity. So 3 apples. Now I want to talk about our contingencies. And the first one has to do with talking about one of something. Now in English, you can say, give me 1 cup of water, or you can say, give me a cup of water. So this is kind of like that situation where you can drop the 1 and it will still make sense. In a full sentence, of course, and not by itself. So let's look at our example. The first one is, 给我拿支铅笔. Give me a pencil. Help me get a pencil. The red dot represents where the 1 would go. So a full sentence would be, 给我拿一支铅笔. Okay, so let me break this down for you here. 拿 is your verb, meaning to grab. And then if you had a 1, it would be right here. And then 支 is classifier for stick-like objects. So like pencils would apply. And so grab, one of. And then 铅笔 is your pencil. 拿支铅笔 means grab a pencil. Not grab 1 pencil, grab a pencil. If that makes sense. The second example is 帮我端杯水. Help me get a cup of water, or get me a cup of water. 帮我 is help me. 端 is the verb here, and it means to like carry, holding something up. to carry something holding it up. And then your 1 would be right here. 杯 is cup, and then 水 is water. 端杯水 means to carry a cup of water. Our second contingency has to do with saying 2 of something. If you know how to count in Chinese, you know 1, 2, 3, that's 1, 2, 3, and you're familiar with this character. But when you say 2 of something, you actually have to change it to this character, and it's pronounced 两. So 两个 is 2. If you want to say give me 2, 我要2个, or 我要2个. And another example, 2本书 means 2 books. So don't say 2本书 or 2个. It's 两个, 2本书. Now let's talk about how to go about learning all these classifiers. Because as I mentioned before, there are a lot of classifiers in Chinese, and it almost feels like every different object has its own classifier. Maybe because of this, I feel like it's best if you learn the objects and then learn the classifiers as opposed to try to learn all of the classifiers and then learning what they apply to. So for example, what I mean by this is if you're learning the word for table, 桌子, at the same time, take a peek at what the classifier is so that if you need to use it in a sentence when you're talking about a quantity of tables, then you know which classifier to use. And what will naturally happen is over time, you'll start to notice patterns. You can see that, oh, this classifier has popped up for this round object and also this round object. So yes, this is the classifier we use for small round objects, whereas this other one we use, or maybe for sticks. It applies to pencils, it applies to rods. Okay, this is the classifier we use for stick-like objects. So now let me just walk you through what this process would look like using a dictionary app on my phone. Alright, so we've got our app open. This is Hanpin Lite, and we're just going to look up 筷子, so chopsticks. Alright, and there it is, the first result. You'll see that the definition says chopsticks, and then it says CL. CL means classifiers. Ooh, and wow, there's 4 of them. So when you're faced with a situation like this, which, by the way, won't happen often, usually it's just 1 or 2, there's 2 difficulties. The first one is which one is used the most often? Which is the most common classifier? And this one's a hard one for me to answer because a lot of it just boils down to, first of all, regional differences in China. In different regions, people might say different things. And the other part is you just have to listen to a lot of materials in real life, which is why using real learning materials is so important for learning any language. And the second difficulty is what are the nuances between these classifiers? And this one's a lot easier for you to do because all you have to do is click on the definitions for the classifiers and they'll basically explain it to you. So let's look at the first one, 对. If we scroll down, it says classifier, couple. Okay, so that makes sense because chopsticks usually come in a pair. So 一对筷子 then is a pair of chopsticks. Let's look at the second one then. The second one says classifier for long, slender objects. And this is gen. So then this classifier, I'll tell you right now, is the only one of these 4 classifiers that we have that refers to one chopstick. Because if you just say 一根筷子, that's just one stick, one chopstick. Whereas if you say 一对筷子, you're saying one couple of chopsticks. So that's including both of the chopsticks that you're using in the pair. In my experience, 把, the third one, is the one that's used most often. And it says classifier for small objects, handful, 一把筷子, is one handful of chopsticks. So again, this is referring to 2 chopsticks. The pair of chopsticks is 一把筷子. And finally, your last one is 双, and that's the most direct in saying a pair. Oh, the definitions actually don't even say classifier, which is kind of funny. But you'll see the third line says pair, so this is literally, it means pair. If you say 一双筷子, it means a pair of chopsticks. So this is how I would go about learning classifiers. You don't have to go look up top 15 classifiers and try to memorize them. Just as you are learning new vocabulary, just look them up and see what the classifiers are. And over time, you'll start building up your list of classifiers that you know. Alright guys, that is all I have for you in this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it and now you have a solid understanding of what classifiers are and how to use them. If you're new to this channel, I upload videos every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. So I hope you'll subscribe and check back next week for a new video. I'll see you guys next time. 下次再见了，拜拜。